that.
Oh, I'll do the full business, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Good morning,
please do.
Good morning, everyone. This is John Grieving, Governance Services. The meeting will begin in approximately 1 minute. If you've not done so already, could I remind you to activate your microphone, to activate your camera, but to also mute your microphone. Chair, I believe all expected members are present. Are you ready to begin?
Yes, I am. Thank you, John.
Can we please switch on the webcast? We're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much, John. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. Hopefully everyone's had their pack and had a chance to read it and digest information. I don't actually think we've got as a massive agenda, but let's get going through it anyway. So start at the beginning. Item number 1, John.
There were no appeals against the inspection of documents.
Thank you. And item 2.
There are no items we need to exclude the press or public from.
Thank you very much. And item 3, any late items?
I'm not aware of any late items.
No, neither am I. Number 4, any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? Please make them now, if you have any. No, great. Apologies for absence. I'm aware Councillor Bentley's given his apologies.
Apart from Councillor Bentley, everybody else is present, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to item 6, the minutes of the previous meeting. Let's start with matters of accuracy. Any matters of accuracy? No. Okay, so let's take them as a fair record and move on to matters arising. I'll first bring in Kate.
Thanks, Chair. Couple of matters arising on items 24 and 25 in the minutes. The period of consultation on the annual governance statement and accounts has concluded, and no questions or comments were received from the public. And on item 24, there was a briefing note on the finance arrangements for lease in and out arrangements circulated to all members on the 24th of August. Item 23, going back in the minutes at page 10, Victoria's here and can give a brief update on where we're at with the finance arrangements around section 114, an emergency budget.
Victoria, do you want to do that now on your if you're speaking later? You're still muted, Victoria. Oh, we'll come back to you. I'm sure you'll have something to say later. Good.
Morning, Andy.
Good morning, Pauline. I hope you're well.
Thank you.
Any other matters arising that anyone wants to raise? No, great. Okay, let's move on to item 8. So item 8, so we discussed this item in a working group, and there's a document which records our conversation on page 30. I think it finishes at 37, starts at page 35, and the recommendations on page 37 are set out. I'm not going to read them out right now because we've all read the papers. Are members content with this, or does anyone have any comments?
Chair, I wasn't happy with this. I thought it was unduly complacent and reluctant to investigate complaints. I would have a struggle to vote for this recommendation.
Who approves the recommendations of the report? So I guess when we talked about it at the working group, I guess what would you want to see, Councillor Illingworth?
Well, I think we should take a closer look at the two cases which I mentioned, which happen to be in Kirkstall, which obviously I've been closely involved in. I don't think they're untypical, and I think there's a common theme that runs through it, and I suspect members will very soon pick up the same theme in their own wards and come to similar conclusions that I've come to. But I just can't be happy with this. It says everything's well and a few minor problems at the edges, and I don't see that. I dread major applications going to panel because or indeed going for a decision, because I'm not confident we're going to take a wise decision, and I've often been disappointed. It's a problem. So I would say I don't have confidence in the present arrangements. We ought to look more closely at some specific cases and then review the situation when we've had a closer look.
Okay, Jonathan, do you have any comments on the two cases that Councillor Illingworth raised last week?
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the Kirkstall Hill case that was mentioned in terms of, particularly I think it was in terms of the further plans that had been received following the panel decision. We looked into that, and officers had made a conscious decision that the changes that were proposed were minor in nature and non-material to the application, in terms of it didn't change the fundamentals of the scheme. I mean, in most cases, I think it was also asked whether this was typical. In most cases, the application is normally determined shortly after the panel meeting, and therefore revisions aren't received. But on occasions, we do get some tweaking to the scheme, as in this particular case. And the application hasn't yet been determined because there are some Section 106 matters to be resolved to ensure that the legal agreement complies with the requirements of the panel itself. So we did look into this, and we did find that the alterations were, as I say, minor in nature, such that referral back to panel wasn't required in that particular case. There may be other occasions where applications and changes to them are more significant, and we would refer those back to panel to ensure that members are aware of what those changes are. And in terms of the other matter, we think that the working group's recommendation in relation to requiring that schemes on council land where there's a breach of control does include a protocol for consideration of them would be sufficient to ensure that other directorates are aware of the obligation to ensure that they are complying with the planning legislation. And as we mentioned before, the council, as a planning authority, wouldn't prosecute itself in terms of those breaches of control. So the sort of best mechanism that can be achieved really is to refer them and escalate those matters, having reached agreement at very senior officer level with the chief executive that breaches will be resolved within the council. So from that perspective, we think that both of those recommendations are achievable and proportionate. Thank you, Chair.
I suspect Councillor Illingworth isn't worried about the second recommendation in the notes. Do you want to come back on the changes point?
Yes, Chair. Well, one of the problems I've got is that you have to choose a specific example which is documented in order to raise it at the panel. But what I'm actually looking at is a pattern of behaviour here, where certainly on the artisan application, the developer repeatedly changed his position throughout the whole consideration, and to the point where people couldn't rely on what they were told. You know, that we had a public consultation, two public consultation meetings, which were well attended, and the public received assurances then, which were not actually delivered by the developer, but based their initial opinions on what they'd been told. And at each stage of the process, as soon as we passed that particular hurdle, all bets were off, and the issue was then changed. So there's a glowing report of public consultation, because at the time, people were really pleased with what they'd been told. It just didn't happen. And later in the process, all the various promises were chipped away, and we're left with the bare bones of the application, which was no longer acceptable. And the public are rightly outraged by this process and should it should be allowed is their reaction. Had they known what the final deal was going to be, they'd have made a lot more fuss at the beginning. But that was impossible because you always have to react to the actual plans that are on the table, not what you think is going to happen in the future. So I think there's widespread dissatisfaction with the outcome on the artisan application, and the public feel they've been cheated, to be blunt. I can't think of any other word to describe it. Not just the public, but the Civic Trust and just about everybody else who commented an application which bore little relationship to what was actually done. And the worry in people's mind is that the process has been distorted by the fact that the council was going to make a substantial capital receipt from the scheme. And they felt that and I think there's some justice in this comment, that because the council was going to improve its financial position, the application didn't get the scrutiny it deserved. That's what people think, it's what they say in pubs, and I have some sympathy with them. But on McFadden, the other one, which was the failure to enforce, the members need to have a closer look at what happened here. It really isn't accurate what's in our minutes and in the draft conclusions. This was bad stuff. You'll look through it and you'll see the rest of the panel that this wasn't a good exercise. It didn't leave the council with shining halo. It looked like a shabby little deal, and that I think is what actually happened.
Jonathan, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. In terms of Kirkstall Hill planning application, that went to panel at least twice, and the matters that have been raised by Councillor Illingworth were discussed at length by the panel itself, and all those concerns were aired by Councillor Illingworth and members of the public during that process. So members were aware of the disappointment and disquiet in terms of the changes to the plans that were received prior to the decision being made, and that was made very clear to the members at the time of the application. When they were considering whether to approve or not. So I think the issues are documented and were well made at the time, and those concerns were taken into account by members in reaching a conclusion to decide the application as well. So I would say that, as I say, although those concerns were well expressed, members did nevertheless conclude that the scheme in its final form there were considered to be acceptable. And in terms of the other matter, I'm not sure what else we can suggest beyond the recommendation as set out in the briefing note paper.
I'm not sure if I managed to get my message across last time, but the plans panel went to the site, did a site visit, identified specific development which had been carried out without planning permission, and said that it should be reversed and the building demolished. And the council, faced with a panel decision that specifically asked for a feature to be removed, did nothing. And it's still there. That's what I find upsetting. It's still there.
So Councillor Illingworth, on that point, I definitely heard you last time, and that is why the point about having a process to work this through, because the council seems understandably doesn't want to prosecute itself. There has to be an enforcement measure, and I feel like the second recommendation does address that. I think because it's saying, look, we need to be able to enforce against ourselves effectively. I think your point about the first issue raised about whether there's been substantial changes is something that we haven't made a recommendation specifically about, and we hadn't heard John's come back. I guess in terms of the committee, in terms of the governance process, the question is, how do we take it forward? So I'm not sure necessarily it's our role to go back and say that decision, but it might be an interesting case study if we have our opinions versus so the officers have said there wasn't any material changes. That's what I think I heard Jonathan say, and you're saying there were material changes that the panel didn't know about, and so that might be an interesting case study to look at. I do think that could be a valid point.
Mm.
Just at this point, I think it's probably worth bringing some other people in, because I think
Indeed,
other
yes.
people have got some comments. I'm assuming comments on this issue. So I'll bring in Councillor Trustwell next.
Well, Chair, I haven't got any comments to make on the specific issue that John's raised, although I do understand the principles that he's expounding, and I think we do need to follow it up in some way, if only to reassure ourselves that the points that he's raised are being tackled somewhere substantively, if not by us. But I just wanted to move on, and forgive me for reiterating something I said in the working party, but I remember the last time we discussed planning substantively in this committee, and we had a really, I thought, useful, and officers might have felt slightly overly robust discussion. Compared to that format of the report, which gave us rather more detail to substantiate some of the assertions, I just find this, and I'm trying not to be too pejorative, but I just found this report somewhat soulless and anodyne. In the previous report did give us at least some statistics and some figures to back up the assertions, often where the comparisons in terms of appeals and members overturning officer recommendations were favourable, rather than being negative. But I found that sort of comparative information quite useful, and it gave us the basis for quite a good and robust discussion. And I think I seem to remember Councillor Graham making some very valid points from the point of view of her particular experience. Some of the other issues that I'd like to see covered in a report are the way we tackle matters such as viability. Over the years, that's become a really crucial cornerstone of discussions about fairly substantial developments, be they housing or business. And we need to be assured, as part of our role in terms of governance and audit, that the advice we take and the way we look at viability is robust, because there is still a view out there, and to some extent I agree with John, a lot of it is public perception, maybe not fair or accurate, but nevertheless public perception, that we let developers get away with things. They simply claim, oh, we can't do that, we can't provide this amount of affordable housing, we can't discharge these responsibilities because it would not make the development viable. And I think we need to be assured on that. One of the points that's been made in my own scrutiny board when we've looked at elements of planning, not across the board, but elements of planning, is the way Section 106 monies are spent, and to try and ensure that local members in the areas that should benefit from those past 106 payments, and some of these date back 15 years in my own ward experience, are shared with members, and they know what's happening and they know what money's available, and they're able to have some input, and we're able to look at using that money hopefully within the parameters of sustainable development and climate emergency. That's clearly not happening, and that's the experience of members on the scrutiny board that I chair, and Jonathan is a fellow member of that board, and he knows what I'm talking about. And we actually question this, and it's one of the few occasions where a scrutiny board recommendation actually said, no, we're not accepting this, you're not doing what we asked, you're not progressing it properly, so we are going to give you a negative on that, and that doesn't happen very often. And I suppose my final comment, and I'm sorry if this sounds long-winded, is just to dig below the surface of the way we look at criticisms or adverse judgments. So I'm thinking about ombudsman adjudications. There's no reference as to whether there have been any. If there haven't, then I'd like to know. I think that's a good sign. There is reference to the judicial review on the core strategy. I appreciate there's very little that can be rehearsed in public, because that is an ongoing legal process. It would be useful to have more information about appeals. We're simply reassured that we have a good record on appeals. Well, you know, it would be nice to have the statistics and the comparisons with past years and with other core authorities. It's obviously on record. It can be done as a cut and paste. And the other is to get some feel for the sort of complaints we get about the planning system from the public and from elected members like John, going back to his point, so that, you know, we know how many complaints there are, whether there are any themes, whether what action is taken to address those themes or those individual complaints. I just don't get any feel for that from the way the report has now been reconstituted. And yeah, I'll finish my diatribe there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Trustwell. I'm not sure there's much that Jonathan can come back immediately on that. So I'll bring in Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I associate myself to what Councillor Trustwell said. I think the downgrading the 106 team from I think it's a 4 to a 5, which is requiring improvement, has really been a rocket up that particular department. And I think across the board, we should consider using that type of power on scrutiny a bit more liberally than we do at the moment. I'm also very sympathetic to what Councillor Illingworth says and the points that he's made from this meeting and also at the last group. Yeah, this report. I don't know. I think I'm with John. I don't think I could vote for this in these recommendations in the way they are at the moment. On Friday lunchtime, myself and my 2 ward colleagues were given notice that a site in our ward for 153 units on Greenbelt land, which had been removed from the SAP after the Airborough court ruling, is actually going to panel on the 1st of October, and the council are recommending that it be approved. I agree with Councillor Illingworth. It just seems that any development that the council wants to go forward, whether it be for reasons within his ward or the reasons which I think it is in this ward, which is on the old college site and they need to pay off the debts, so let's get it sold and get it built on. They just find a way to railroad it through, in my view, and it's just not acceptable. There's no update on the biodiversity report. There's no update on the highways report. There's no update on if any 106 is coming our way. There's nothing in there about the masses of school places this development is going to generate, and it just feels constantly like it's to be railroaded through if it's what the council wants. And based on that, I don't think that the recommendations go far enough to protect our wards, to protect our residents from this type of view within the council. That's those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Can I bring in Louise, because she's indicated she wants to speak as well.
Hi, yeah, I can understand the issues you've got, and obviously Councillor Illingworth, I know we've had some correspondence around this in the past. So would it help if we actually, as internal audit, did a formal review around this, maybe using these as case studies, for example, and then come back to you? Would that help? We can actually tease out if there are any issues, especially with these cases that you've raised. I'd just like to put that offer out there to you.
Well, I would welcome that, Chair.
Yeah.
I think we should take a closer look, and I think that will then bring the issues out.
Okay. I mean, that sounds really positive to me as well. It feels to me like there's definitely a sense from the committee that we want to look at this further. So what, just to move things on, what my suggestion would be is that we recommend that Louise and her team does a review with these case studies as our first recommendation. Yep. As a second recommendation, I do think we should push forward the ideas of having a protocol for if there's enforcement issues on council land, because I think we need to move that forward, because we definitely discussed this last year and we haven't really got anywhere with it. So I think we do need to move that second recommendation forward in any case. And then what I'm hearing from members is that we don't want to accept the recommendation that we're happy with the assurances in place until we've heard back from the internal audit team. Is that is that fair? Is everyone comfortable with that as a way forwards? I'm seeing nods from most. Councillor Illingworth, seeing a nod from him.
Yes.
And Councillor Trustwell. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Okay. So I think on that basis we'll move forwards with that. I very much appreciate members' comments on this. I think it is very helpful, and I do think you're right, we need to move this forwards, and we don't want to be having the same conversation each year. And I also just to stress, I do hear the point Councillor Trustwell has made again today around data to back up assertions, and I think that is a key aspect of governance, is understanding the data behind the statements. So I think that's something we can learn from as a committee. So, and I also heard your point about the viability. I had a housing development in my ward, and I had one developer, the architect came to me and said, there's no money for social housing, it's not a viable project. And they got refused, and then they came back with a different partner, the same architect, and said it's going to be 100% social housing, and that's because it was a different backer. And I just found that very difficult to accept. But in that case, it was refused with no social housing, so that was a positive story. On that, I think we should move on, if that's okay with the committee. I think we've got a way forward for now. So thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your time. I think we'll be in touch, even myself or Kate will be in touch about how we move forwards on this, and probably Louise as well. But feel free to dial out if you don't want to listen to the rest of the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, bye.
Thanks, John. Okay, on to item 9. So we have, again, we discussed this item in our working group, and the notes are on page 47 and 48. I'll open up to comments from members. Councillor Trustwell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just going through very quickly, paragraph 3.2 gives us, I think, a very useful breakdown of the nature of disciplinaries. I just wonder whether there is any way of benchmarking that against other authorities and their disciplinary records. My next question relates to paragraph 3.26 on page 43, and it relates to the feedback from the Wellbeing Pulse survey. I've not heard that term before. It indicates that over 80% of respondents reported feeling happy with the level of support they're receiving, but obviously then you have to ask the question about what's happening with the remaining almost 20%. And there is reference to the fact that they're offered a phone call, but my question is, in terms of that rather substantial number, I mean, my rapid mental arithmetic suggests it's about 1,000 of the respondents. Are there any themes around why people don't feel sufficiently supported? Is it about workplace environment? Is it about the way they're managed? Is it about mental health or physical health issues? Is there any picture that's emerging from that not insubstantial feedback? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Trustwell. It's Helen here.
Yeah, I am. Hi, everybody. Hi. Yes, certainly we have conducted benchmarking exercises in the past with our partners, either the core cities or sometimes with our partners in West Yorkshire. That isn't something we've done with the data from last year's disciplinaries, but it is something that we've done in the past. So if the committee wishes that to be done, then we can contact our other local authorities, and we can do that. Previously, the benchmarking has come back as shown very much sort of similar patterns. So when we have benchmarked before, it's not necessarily just been on disciplinaries, but we might look at attendance, performance, and other areas. So we can certainly do that again. And on the feedback from the Wellbeing Pulse Survey, yes, the term Pulse Survey is really just to indicate the speed. So it's the difference between our big, which are now every 2 years, engagement surveys that are open for several months. And because of the nature of COVID and because we wanted feedback back very, very quickly, the Pulse indicates that these surveys were open for a week. So it was quick, sharp. We've done 2 of them since we've been in lockdown. It was to get that very quick, short feedback so that we could react quickly. There was then summary done of the comments that were left to people. So I can contact one of my colleagues who's the lead for that area and get those reports that went back to senior officers about the themes, and I can share those with the committee if that's something that would be of interest. Just off the top of my head, there was, as you might expect, quite a lot of feedback early on around the large numbers of people who worked from home and the equipment, and that's why we did a separate survey of the work from home cohort to get more detailed information about their needs and things, you know, that because people went home so quickly, they didn't necessarily immediately have all of the kit that they needed. So, yep, I can get some more information around those things, no problem.
Councillor Trustwell, are you content with
No,
that?
that's fine. That's fine, Chair. And I think it also reinforces the point of just a little bit more information to put flesh on the bones of these, what should I say, slimmed down reports.
There was one item that I was coming back to let you know an update on from the working group, because we would normally have completed this in May, but the annual exercise, which is around our high risk post holders, there's 1,362 posts that are identified as high risk. This is for the annual register of interest and the new positive assurance around the gifts and hospitality. And as of close of play Friday, we only now have 45 left to come in. 37 of those are from online people that we're emailing. There are 8 which we're communicating with post. So that's going to be people who aren't actually in work at the moment, whether that be maternity leave or on long-term sick. So I believe that the arrangement was that I would obviously provide an update for the next committee meeting in October with the expectation that it'll be 0. And I'm confident that having got to 45 at this point, they're coming in every day. So we've had a lot of people on annual leave in the September post-August as well. So I'm confident that those will be 0 for your October meeting.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. Good. Okay. I can't see anyone else indicating to speak. Are we content with the recommendation? I think that's yes. Good. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's move on to item 10, which is Louise.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
This is the report on the update on the Access project. I just want to bring members' attention to a few points. So excellent progress has been made in the last reporting period, and as of this morning at 9:30, I can confirm that no Access 2003 databases remain to be uplifted to Access 2010. So that's very good news. I will come on to the full figures at the end of the report. The only work remaining is ensuring that services are fully able to continue all actions that they require to do with those new Access 2010 databases. And staff from DIS applications teams have been pulled in to assist with that, knowing that full well in the future that they will have to support services and they will own those databases going forwards. I can report that no new databases have been created in the last period, and as you will recall, at the back end of last year, this was a significant problem, but following the help from this committee and from Neil Evans, some very firm communication went out to all services to tell them to stop creating new databases, and that has worked. So thank you very much for that assistance in that matter. There has been teams, as we've been working with services, they have come forward and informed us of a couple of old databases. So whilst they're no longer in use, the data within them is required to be kept for statutory reasons, statutory retention periods. And so there has been some work just migrating that data into the new databases so that we haven't lost the data. Okay, so over the summer, I have had 2 conversations with the Cabinet Office to discuss the next phase of the Access project and the implications that that has on our PSN certification. Due to COVID, you'll know from the number of times that I've been to this committee that our normal cycle for applying for our PSN certification is generally July. But because of COVID, that has now moved to December of this year. So we haven't put in, we've put in an interim submission, but we won't be putting in our actual submission until December of this year. Obviously, as part of those conversations with the Cabinet Office, I needed to ensure that the work that we were doing and the plans that we've been putting in place around the next phase of Access, which is the eradication of access completely, and the Access 2010 databases, that they were in agreement and with our plans, proposed plans, and that it wouldn't impact on our PSN application in December. So in principle, the Cabinet Office have agreed on our plans for our removal of our reliance on Access. And I do have a written confirmation of this from the Cabinet Office, which should committee require or be interested, I can share that written communication with you following this meeting. However, this project and the work of this committee has raised a number of issues around project management and such like within DIS, and DIS have now recognised those issues by this project and a number of other things. So a considerable amount of work has been going on, and government's arrangements in DIS have now been strengthened considerably. As stated in the report, a new portfolio management office has been established, and a new governance structure has also been put in place. And obviously the phase 2 of the Access 2010 project, as well as other governance related projects, will fall under this new governance structure. I will continue to remain as the senior responsible officer for this project, but in addition, I now chair a newly established compliance board, which will ensure oversight of all projects which have an impact on our compliance regime. I'm not sure if you recall, but when I reported back in March, the annual report, I was asked to outline all the projects that are ongoing, which do have an impact on our compliance regime, and that was brought up in that meeting, but I think it was about a week before we went into lockdown. So since that time, there's been no additional sort of focus on that, but we now have this compliance board in place, and it means that there will be regular reporting on all projects that have a compliance implication, and it gives a a route for the raising of risks and issues and other escalations. So there's no everyone knows that that is the route that we have to go through, rather than the problems that we saw before, where things seemed to be a bit all over the place. Just to then move on to the actual figures at the end of the report. So again, as of this morning, I can confirm that there are no new databases have been created. There are no databases in progress. There are no databases waiting on the business. We have 73 databases in test and 16 databases awaiting go live. And I can take any questions.
Thank you, Louise. I can see a couple of indicators, so I'll let them go first. Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, Chair. I am astonished. I'm delighted, but astonished that we're going to get rid of access completely. We must need relational databases. What are we going to use instead?
Yes, you're quite right, but there are a number of other products available, and the work going forwards, they are almost splitting to 3 chunks, as it were. And the first chunk is on average around 50% of those databases are for business analysis. So that data is moved into business intelligence tools specifically. And you may or may not have heard of Microsoft products called Power BI. So we would be moving those sort of reporting requirements and business intelligence requirements into that product. There's another chunk of databases which the data really should never have been in an Access database. They should have been in a line of business application. So, for example, a children's social care database or a housing database, so that all the data should have been kept together. So in those cases, that data will be migrated into the line of business application. So it's all together, and we haven't got these separate databases here, there, and everywhere. The third chunk are those where there isn't an appropriate line of business application, and the council would either have to look at what applications it's already got and see if any are suitable for that data, or we may have to go out to procure something completely new. But that's all documented in the phase 2 plan for Access.
Thank you, Louise. Can I bring in Councillor Trustwell, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This has obviously been an issue of long-standing concern to this committee, and it looks at long last as though we are where we need to be, and where ideally we should have been some time ago. But could I just repeat the usual committee catechism to Louise, to seek assurance that the teams or people dealing with this issue within the council are sufficiently resourced, have the right skills, and that the issue is being now fully prioritised by all sections of the council. And finally, I would certainly like a copy of the Cabinet Office letter to which a report refers.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. I've got a couple of questions as well, if that's all right, Louise. So,
sorry, Chair, could I just say that Louise is absolutely saying absolutely we've now got all the resources, skills, and prioritisation that's required.
Yep. Fair clarification. Thanks, Councillor Trustwell.
Yes, and the new arrangements in DIS now mean that, whereas as previously, as previously reported, resources were often moved from one project to the other, and then I would find out a number of weeks later when the project was slipping. The implementation of the portfolio board and the compliance board means that no resources can be moved without discussions first to understand what's the impact on any of the compliance projects in moving these resources around. So yes, it's now managed in a much stricter way than it was previously.
Thank you. And I guess we'll see that.
We've got all the skills. That was just one of the other outstanding areas.
Yes, we do.
Fine,
now.
thank you.
Councillor, yes.
Gareth, did you want to come in on this point?
Thanks, Chair. I just thought it would be worth just contemplating the impact of that last session on the annual governance statement. So as Councillor Trustwell said, this has been a sort of a long-standing issue, certainly since I joined the committee probably about 18 months ago. And obviously it was flagged in the annual governance statement that we went through in draft form at the last meeting. And given that document is a live document until it's signed at some point, sort of end of October, November time, some of those developments and actions that have been taken, probably want to be reflected in some way in that annual governance statement, so that it's the latest position that's in that key public document, Chair. That was all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. I support that. In terms of Councillor Harron, do you want to speak?
I just want to second Councillor Trustwell's suggestion that we all see the Cabinet Office report. Just clarify, it's not confidential, is it? Is it a public document?
So is it a public document, Louise? The Cabinet Office email?
I would have to check. Obviously, I will have to check the wording, simply because we wouldn't want any document going into the public that would advertise our security structures and our current security stance. So I will certainly check first before committing to saying whether it could be a public document or not.
Yeah. In any case, please circulate it to the whole committee.
Yes.
And make a note about how confidential it is. Is that okay, Councillor Hammond? Yeah, great. Councillor Graham?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I support everything that's been put forward by Councillor Trustwell and Councillor Illingworth. And coming back also to Councillor Harrand, we should be seeing as much information as is available as this board. And I do think that I've thought for a few years that the board is not acknowledged the way that it should be. And we're not just a talking shop to come and fill in a few hours to be on the agenda. So I think that we must take seriously, again, this board. And Councillor Trustwell has always very eloquently put things forward. So I agree with everything that's been said, but this board needs to be acknowledged as the members do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. So my questions, Louise. So in terms of the time frame for those on test and are waiting to go live, what's the time frame for that? Secondly, in terms of the Access Data 2010 database, when are the key milestones? Because I think that's something the committee, certainly I will be interested in, because I want to know that the new governance arrangements, I think we've sort of said this several times today, needs to actually happen, not just say we're going to have the right compliance the compliance procedures in place, and seeing the Access 2010 project moving forward will be one piece of evidence on that. And thirdly, paragraph 5.1 says that the Director of Resources and Housing, amongst others, is ensuring this project is prioritised. Can you confirm that Neil is being briefed and kept up to speed on the progress of this project?
Yes, so on your final point, yes, Neil has been receiving the weekly reports on this project, the same as yourself, Councillor Scopes. So he has been, and I do separately meet with Neil on a monthly basis, and we do always cover this particular project as one of our standing items for discussion. So Neil is fully aware of where we're at with this, and I did brief him last week prior to coming to committee today. As for your other two questions, would it be better if I circulated that information? I don't have it to hand, and I don't want to sort of be looking through my email folders whilst I'm on this call, if that's more suitable. But I can find that information for you today, and could circulate the time frame for the rest of the Access 2003 going live and the key milestones for 2010.
Yes, thank you, Louise. The reason I ask is because I think it feeds into a question about how we want this to be continued to be reported to us going forwards, and I think that's one of the key questions here. I'm keen to stress that slimming down reports is not the aim. The aim is to like focus on the governance and audit and risk stuff, is what I'm trying to do. And I guess in my head there's two. This project isn't necessarily something that we want to focus on, other than the fact that it got so far behind that we felt the need to monitor it on a regular basis. And I guess it's a much wider piece of monitoring and governance assurance we need from both DIS, but also in your role as GDPR guardian, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And so I guess we can't really make a decision about what report we want next about the Access database until we know what the timeframes are. But I think we will want to keep monitoring this, at least at some level, because it will demonstrate whether the new compliance arrangements are working. I think that'll be a good case study. But I think going forward, we need to think about the wider governance piece, but also the wider GDPR piece, which I guess in some ways is this is a cross-cutting. It cuts across both those themes, because it's GDPR and it's IT infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I'd welcome any comments you had or thoughts you had on that.
Yes, Councillor, I agree, and certainly with my obviously I've been coming to this committee with almost wearing two hats, and I think it would be beneficial for us to be able to separate out that, because certainly from my data protection officer perspective, there are other elements that I feel that could be discussed from a governance perspective at this committee. But at the same time, I quite agree that there needs to still be some level of monitoring of this project, but alongside some, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of projects which are being managed by DIS which have an impact on our compliance posture, and I think committee needs to be aware of the wider agenda as well, to understand and see the whole, rather than just the focus that understandably we've had on this project over the last 18 months or so.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is almost we need two semi-regular reports, one from you about GDPR and one from either you or someone else in DIS about DIS risks. And then there's another piece on top of that, is how does the access monitoring fit? But we can't decide on that until we know the timeline. That's what I'm hearing. I feel like maybe that's probably, it sounds like a sensible way forwards. I'm just looking for members to either agree with me or not agree with me in terms of as a way forwards. I think I'm getting general nods. So let's do that. Just the other piece. You also mentioned your compliance board. Would that be fitting into your GDPR hat or into the DIS?
That's definitely with my GDPR.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll be expecting to see at least some thoughts around that. Good. Okay. So moving back to the agenda. So the recommendation item is paragraph 6.1. On page 53, the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee is asked to consider the contents of this report and support actions therein. Are we satisfied to accept that recommendation? Good. Thank you very much, everyone. That's very positive. Thank you for that, Louise. And also thank you for suggestions on way forwards. I feel like, yeah, I mean, I know Gareth said he's known about it for 18 months. I've known about it since I got first appointed on this committee in May 2018. So it's nice that it's there. Hopefully we're going to see the back of phase 1 anyway. Okay, moving on to agenda item 11 on page 55. Over to Louise, are you speaking on this?
I am, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So today's update report covers the period June to August 2020. So rather than take you through the report, I'd just like to highlight a few areas for you today. So in my view, internal audit are continuing to rise to the challenge of working and auditing remotely. It really is a credit to the team. They've managed to issue 12 audit reports in the period, plus a whole array of grant assurances that are listed in the report. 10 of the 12 audit reports have had positive opinions and 2 have had limited. The 2 limited opinions being the IR35 legislation and the DOLS, which is the deprivation of liberty safeguards. The DOLS was a follow-up where the key findings were around the timescales that the team were working to. Plus, the performance information that was available was still a bit limited. So at the time of the original audit, management were aware that new legislation was due. So they actually took the decision to delay implementing the improved arrangements. And this was mainly because they didn't want to actually duplicate the effort and repeat the exercise later down the line. However, legislation's lagged a bit behind and it's still yet to be passed. So management have actually now decided to put some interim measures in place, which should hopefully, the next time we do a follow-up, will actually give us the okay to have a positive assurance. So the second limited assurance was for IR35. And this involved a full review of the central controls and of the controls within the directorates, because obviously the central, creditors and taxation team have some responsibility, but also the directorates have a large responsibility as well. So we found that the central controls had improved, but the controls in the directorates hadn't improved sufficiently. However, since the report was issued recently, we've actually had some really good engagement with the directorates, and in particular adults and Steve Hume. So we're working with officers, Steve, mainly, and developing processes within their teams and really trying to steer them as to what information they need to try and help them comply. So hopefully we'll using adults as a bit of a test case and then helping roll that out. And I think it's just around actually understanding where some of this information was, so we could actually cleanse all the data that they needed. So going on through the report, we've got the section on fraud. So the fraud team are really continuing to fight the good fight. So we've currently got 30 referrals that are still open, and 20 of those are out with the directorates for investigation, and 10 are being internally investigated within internal audit. They're all risk assessed, and we have protocols depending on that risk assessment as to whether the directorate and management should do the investigation or whether it would be better off investigated within internal audit. And as a wider audit team, we continue to support council colleagues in many, many ways, including providing ad hoc advice and check and challenge at board meetings, for example. And a really great example of this is our contributions to the core business transformation programme. Now, we're very much at the start of this journey, but it's a massive and pivotal programme for the council. And in this project, Internal Audit are working alongside the programme to help ensure that governance arrangements are in place and operating, and that compliance is actually built in as a fundamental part of the design. And then the remainder of the report, it just goes onto our performance as internal audit. So that's our PIs in terms of feedback, but also progress against the plan. So that's the report in a nutshell. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I can't see. Oh, yep. Councillor Hammond. I don't know if your hand's gone back down. No. Okay. Councillor Garner.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Louise. There's two bits from me. There's question I have on the dolls and it says where are we? Section 3.8 and management has responded positively, and you're working with the director at leadership team. Is how often are updates sort of between the leadership team and yourselves and the exec member on that? Because that's really important, especially for me personally with a family member under adults. Yeah, we'd just really like to know that one.
I think there's regular liaison with the leadership team. Like I mentioned, we have regular liaisons anyway with Steve, but formally, probably quarterly. As far as engagement with the exec member, I don't actually have that information to hand, but I can get back to you, Councillor, with that information.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I really feel with that one, you know, not just personally, but really important to us as an organisation, and that's one of them. Yeah. One of the most important things that we do, possibly as a council, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just on the open referrals for the reactive anti-fraud work, are there certain directorates that have more open referrals than others, and is that a worry? If so, are you able to give us a breakdown?
I can get more information on that. What tends to happen is open referrals that get passed over to directorates. There tends to be a lot around housing benefits, so investigations on through whistleblowing, for example, neighbours, reporting on neighbours, that kind of thing. But wider than that, I haven't got the exact breakdown, but I can send that through to all members if all members would like.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hammond.
Alleviation scheme on page 69 reports that review is in progress.
Chair, I can't hear Peter. I don't know if
I can only just hear him, so I'm going to try and hear him, and then I'll repeat him if no one else can.
Very briefly, then, I'm asking for an update, perhaps 2 or 3 pages, on the progress of the flood alleviation scheme to our next meeting.
So he's asking for an update on the progress on the flood alleviation scheme for the next meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Good. Good. Anything else, Councillor Hammond? Great. Thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Trustwell next, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ben's already addressed one of the points I wanted to make on reactive anti-fraud work. I just wondered whether the COVID pandemic period and the fact that we've obviously had to box clever, for want of a better expression, in terms of the way we operate, has thrown up any issues other than that you've referred to, Louise, in your report in terms of the administration and disbursement of government grants. Has there been anything else that's kind of emerged? And again, it's going back to my hobby horse. On paragraph 3.6 and paragraph 3.9, the references to dolls and to IR35, I think it just would be useful to have a few examples of what we're actually talking about in terms of those measures which aren't being addressed by management or remain outstanding. And obviously the reporting to IR35 was a couple of years ago, and I think it came to this committee shortly after that. And I must admit, it's probably a product of my deteriorating brain in old age, but I don't remember all the substantive issues. Was it whether we were treating people who should be treated as employees as contractors and vice versa, or was
So I missed the end of that, Councillor Trustwell.
Oh, sorry. My reference to IR35 was that it's a couple of years since the issue's been in detail to the board, I think. And it was just to get a refresh as to what the substantive issues were. Is it about the way we treat people's employment? We're treating people who should be employees as contractors or vice versa. Is that the main issue?
Yes, it's around IR35. It's where people are working for us on a temporary basis wish to be paid via an invoice, so as a contractor rather than on payroll, and it's that assessment that we have to do as to whether they should be on payroll or not. So therefore we're responsible for paying the tax.
Okay, and where does the responsibility for that rest, with us or with them? In other words, who would HMRC chase?
They will chase us.
Right, okay.
This is why it's an issue for us. We need to make sure that we have the proper processes in place to account for that appropriately.
Thank you. Have you got any follow-up, Councillor Trustwell?
No, that's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Bring in Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking at 4.3.3 on page 64, which mentions the climate emergency. And I thought it's at two levels this. At one point, the actual sort of climate cost of the audit operation must be fairly modest. On the other hand, look from a different point of view. This is going to turn our whole world upside down. Our cash flows, our business plan, everything we do is going to be transformed by this. And the job's enormous. And I'm just wondering how you're going to tread a path between the trivial and the world shattering.
Obviously, every year we do a risk-based plan. Yes, it would have been good to include something on climate emergency this year, but obviously the COVID pandemic put paid to that. But obviously each year we do consider it. And to be honest, for us as internal audit, we'd actually, the first instance, it would probably be looking at like the corporate arrangements for how we were assessing and the role that the council could play within the wider community, and also what we can reflect and do as ourselves to address that internally, such as maybe reduce printing. So there's lots of areas that we can consider, but obviously that's done on a risk basis.
Thanks for that question. That's a really good question, and I think we as a council declared a climate emergency last year. And I guess at some point before 2030, it would be helpful to have some kind of internal audit in terms of whether we are progressing in the right direction to meet that target. I know it was an ambitious target, and it is we've got to recognise that it's an ambitious target, not necessarily an easy target to achieve. But that doesn't take away from the desire from many people from all parties to achieve that target. So I think at some point it'd be good to have it in our long-term plan to say, not long-term, medium-term plan. At this point, whether it's, I don't know when would be appropriate, have we started moving in the right direction? I think that's would be a really helpful piece of work to do, and whether that's next year or the year after, I'm not sure, but I think it should be on the agenda. The other thing I wanted to ask, in terms of just check that you've got it on your notes. You'll be able to fit in the extra report that you said you'd look at around planning. And I think that's probably quite an urgent piece of work before we can accept any assurances around the planning.
Yeah, that's
piece.
fine, Chair. Yes, we'll treat it as a priority. As previously mentioned, when I brought the revised plan back, the reprioritised plan, I did mention that we'd held back some spare capacity to see if there's any emerging risks. So obviously this can count as one of those.
Thank you. I can't see anyone else indicating at this point. So with that, are we content with the recommendations on page 66? Yep, I'm seeing nods and acceptance. So thank you very much, Louise. That's very helpful. So moving on to item 12 in the work programme. I think the first person it'd be helpful to hear from on this is Victoria, if that's all right, in terms of the work programme and in particular the accounts. And then I'll bring Gareth in after Victoria.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Stokes. Sorry, I had trouble at the beginning trying to take it off mute, so I do apologise for not coming in. Just on the work programme and on the accounts, we're currently undertaking the audit, which I'm sure Gareth will go through in more detail. We're on track with the audit, but we are proposing to take that back 1 month. There are a number of reasons why we're going to delay the accounts and why we're proposing to delay the audit of the accounts. The first one is around the decision that we're requiring on the current financial year, which is for 2021. We're waiting for government to give us their decision on whether there's going to be any further support from MHCLG for this current financial year. Obviously, we couldn't ask external audit to sign off the accounts until we'd had that decision from central government, and we're expecting that mid-October, and therefore that's why we're proposing to delay the audit, the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, where they consider the accounts until mid-November. The second reason is around the pension fund, so we're waiting for some a report around the assurance on the pension fund audit, and that should be again at the end of October. So we're just waiting for that decision, and again, therefore, Grant Thornton wouldn't be able to give their opinion on the accounts without that assurance. And then the third thing is around the progression of the audit. I think it's very challenging with working remotely, etc., and with COVID-19, although the information sharing is happening, it has put in some different challenges that we wouldn't have normally have expected. And therefore, with those three things taken into consideration, my recommendation is that we do delay the Audit and Governance Committee until mid-November, if that's acceptable by the committee.
Can I just clarify for everyone's point of view, in terms of meeting requirements of the law, I'm assuming this delay is acceptable. And then also, second question, just for clarity, is just around how do we compare to other councils? So the pension scheme issue, I suspect, isn't just us, for example. So can you just clarify those 2 points, Victoria?
Yeah, the first one is that the deadline for the external audit completion was the end of November, so we're still in those requirements. And the second point around the with other authorities, there is still some authorities that haven't had their accounts signed off for last year, and therefore I think everybody's aiming to get done for the end of November, but I'm sure there'll be some delays, but we will be in line with the statutory requirements.
Thank you, Victoria. And bring in Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, not really much more to add to what Victoria said there, Chair. Excuse me. I mean, just to confirm to the committee that Victoria and I and our respective teams remain in regular discussion. So, you know, Victoria and I had 2 meetings last week, for example, and those 3 areas that Victoria highlighted, you know, are, you know, why we will propose to put the committee's date back a month from mid-October to mid-November. And again, just to emphasise, Chair, the statutory date for audited accounts this year is the 30th of November. We don't envisage any issues with that. And in terms of how you compare elsewhere, certainly in terms of most pension fund audits are running to sort of an end of October, early November sign-off date. Therefore, you know, the administering, you know, the audited bodies that need that assurance, their audits are obviously not going to be signed off before then. So certainly I haven't signed any opinions as yet. And I think nationally Grant Thornton are likely to only sign a handful, and that's where you've got a local authority that also administers the pension fund. So in essence, the same team are doing both jobs, and they typically tend to be London boroughs, Chair. So most of my sign-offs are planned for sort of the middle of November onwards, Chair. And I think, you know, Victoria set out very clearly the reasons for the proposals to shunt that back. The only other thing I'd mention, Chair, just whilst I've got the floor, if you like, is the long-awaited Redmond review was published last week, Chair. So at the next normal meeting, if you like, the one in the middle of December, I'd propose that Parminder and I do a bit about the Redmond review and its recommendations, and also talk through the new external audit code for 2021 and some of the changes that you can expect from our audit approach for next year. And we plan to do something on that at the December meeting, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, I welcome that. And if you have, I don't know if you'll have a standard briefing that you share with clients. I'm sure the committee would appreciate seeing that as well. Ahead of that, we do like to ensure that we are knowledgeable in our role, so that would be helpful.
We'll get something to you and other members this week on that, Chair. We can obviously share the report now, and we've got like a summary. Got key messages, so we'll get that to you, Chair. Thank you.
That'd be appreciated, and obviously we can do some kind of training. I think that is probably sensible. So with that, I guess firstly I need to ask committee to agree to push back the October meeting. I think there's some genuine reasons for this, and it's still within our statutory requirements. So unless someone specifically objects, I think we should do that. And the other thing, I'm going to bring Kate in a minute. The other thing we need to note is that at full council we talked about devolution, and one of the things that was recommended by full council and then exec board is that we looked as the corporate governance audit committee at the governance arrangements of the mayoral authority, and so that has been added to the agenda as well. I don't think there's any way around that, given full council has told us to do it, and so has exec board, but I wanted to flag that, and that's actually a really urgent and important piece of work, because making sure we are comfortable with those arrangements is important. And we've been asked 2 specific questions as well. One of them is whether we invite the mayor to full council once or twice or however many times a year, and so we will need a report on that from Louise, and we will consider that in due course. And with that, I'm assuming there's no objections to that. Good. Do you want to speak, Councillor Garner? Yeah.
Please, thank you. Just on that devolution point, I know we've got the informal working group before that meeting, but could I suggest that, because it's a big issue and under public scrutiny, that's discussed in the live committee as we are now, rather than in the working group, or any other views would be good. But my personal opinion is that should be in the full thing like this.
Yep, I'm happy with that. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to hope that any comments, recommendations that are put forward when we discuss the mayoral situation, that they are taken seriously and are acknowledged, and we're not just a talking shop again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. I will. I'm sure we will be taken seriously. I think it'd be difficult for Executive Board to ask us to look at something and then not take our recommendation seriously. And I think it's clear that we will need to, as a committee, write to Executive Board and or full council to say, we have done what you asked us and this is our recommendations. And we can discuss exactly what that says once we've considered it. Kate, did you have anything else on the work programme that we need to discuss?
Nothing specifically, other than whether you wish as a committee to timetable any reports in relation to the discussion that you had around data protection officer as divergent from DIS governance arrangements. Whether you wanted to add in an extra report perhaps from DIS in relation to their governance arrangements, thus freeing up the March report from Louise to be very much the data protection officer's annual report.
I think on that we just need to see what Louise says in terms of the timetable for the Access database, because what I don't want to do is end up missing an opportunity to scrutinise whether that's on track or not. I mean, we all stand like a stuck record on this point, but we need to make sure it's progressing properly, given the level of scrutiny we've put it under. I think the point is, if it doesn't progress forwards, it would be very disappointing for us as a committee in terms of our influence, which it's got to be. So we've got to keep a track on that. So with that, I think we'll probably need to talk to Louise and bring a formal sort of proposal at the next meeting, which isn't actually that far away. If that's okay with members. I'm really conscious of the need not to miss an opportunity to check on milestones on the Access 2010 project.
Yeah. The only other thing then, Chair, is in terms of moving the date back for what was proposed to be the October meeting of committee into November, and looking at the council calendar, then probably Monday the 23rd, I think it is, of November would be the most appropriate date to move back to, because the week before is very busy with scrutiny boards and the like, and many of the committee's members are tied up with commitments there.
And I suspect there'll be a challenge around hosting 2 live broadcasts. I don't know if we've done that before.
No.
Okay. I don't know if people have their diaries to hand, but I think if you make a note of that and send me, I think hopefully that will be achievable. Good. So with that, I can't see anyone else indicating that. Oh, Paul Trustwell, Councillor Trustwell.
It's just a very minor point about the conduct of meetings, but I just wonder whether Victoria and Louise would care to consider using a headset and a microphone, because the sound quality from both of them was not good. And Councillor Peter Harrand, the reason we couldn't hear you is that you've got your microphone pointing backwards behind your head. And with that, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll hear you better next time, Councillor Harrand.
I'm just wondering whether I should have given that advice.
Yeah, earlier. It would have been helpful. Thank you, Councillor.
No, Paul.
Good. Okay. With that, I will close the meeting and thank everyone very much for your attendance and your comments. As always, very much appreciated. I recognise we've had some robust conversations today, and I do think that is helpful. And I do think there is a place for strong disagreement and expression of views, and that I wouldn't want it any other way. So really appreciate appreciate that, and that is how we'll make the council's governance arrangements better. So thank you very much.